For USCFootball.com, I'm Jack Smith, joined by the coolest man on planet Earth, Chris Trevino, rocking the shades, instant analysis from the USC Spring Game. The defense takes it 42-34 on a game-sealing buzzer-beater interception from Jacobe Covington. It was a back-and-forth battle. Chris, what were some of your biggest takeaways from the field level for USC Spring Game?
It was a fun game. You know, it's beautiful weather. Just for the weather report, some fans came out. It was an exciting game, just going back and forth. You got to see Caleb Williams for just a little bit, but then you got to see a lot of the young guys, a lot of new faces, and I think that was the biggest takeaway from this game, is just seeing all those new faces, seeing all this new look defense in terms of upgrades athletically, they're longer, all those kinds of things. And it just ended on a fun note, you know, back and forth. Offense made a little bit of a comeback there at the end, had a chance to win it in the end. Game-sealing interception by Jacobe Covington. Just a fun way to end spring camp and spring game.
You're right, it was a back-and-forth battle. We can kind of break it down for people that didn't get a chance to tune in on Pac-12 Network. It started with Caleb Williams. We didn't know how much he was going to play. Ended up only being one series and 3 plays. The offense, first team, went 75 yards in 70 seconds to put up 7 points. Caleb found Mario Williams for a touchdown. There were a couple big runs mixed in, and just the first team offense looked as dominant as we saw them last year, and kind of thought, okay, this is going to be the offense putting up a great day. But after that, the defense really dominated for the majority of the rest of the game until the end when the offense started to come back a little bit. What did you notice from that middle period where the defense was so dominating?
Yeah, they really got into their groove after getting shredded by a Heisman winner and his offense. A lot of the players talked about that first drive, and they were like, offensively, they were like, we're back, baby, let's go. So after that, you know, you saw their confidence build a little bit. You know, the tackling was good. Some guys got, you know, forced some missed tackles, but they got some good skill position players over there, Marshawn Lloyd, Raleek Brown. So, you know, that's to be expected at times, but I thought the tackling was solid. They just looked longer all across the board. You felt like the staff was recruiting to get bigger players, get longer players, get more athletic players, and I think we saw that out in the field today. So that's what we were seeing sort of in that middle portion where their confidence was building, able to get some stops, able to get some turnovers. There was a forced fumble, recovery, some interceptions. Jacobe Covington had 2 picks. The freshman Christian Pierce had a pick. So they were making those playmaking things. That was something that Donton Williams talked about. The playmaking was happening with this position group, so you got to see that out here on the field for the spring game. So I think they did a lot of good things in that middle part. You know, it turned into a little bit of a shootout there at the end with the offense coming back. Malachi Nelson leading a couple scoring drives, and then potentially the game winner at the end, but defense was having none of that, and they shut it down for the game-sealing interception, which, you know, again, fun note to end on.
I think as we felt through the spring, the DB room, one of the USC's best, especially on defense, where you've got guys like Covington, Christian Pierce, you've got Damani Jackson, Sear Wright. Both those guys had, I thought, good days today. In the safety room, you have Max Williams, you have the All-American Kalen Bullock, Bryson Shaw. So that was a room you felt pretty good about. I thought they all had really good days against some of these USC skill position players that are so explosive. But one spot that really stood out that's been more of a question mark is that front 7. Lincoln Riley said there's a big noticeable difference between the front 7 last year, where they knew they had holes, they knew they'd have to fix it, and where it stands right now after the offseason changes that they have made. You saw sacks from guys like Anthony Lucas getting pressure, Jamil Muhammad, the freshman Sam Greene, everyone kind of wrecking havoc on the offensive line, getting to the quarterback for a couple sacks. What stood out to you from the front 7, and what some of the coaches and players said about it after the game?
Yeah, the front 7 was kind of one of the major storylines if you're looking at this game, because all those things I talked about with in the middle parts of the defense, you know, with the confidence getting bigger, athletic, longer, a lot of that goes to the front 7 and what they were able to do and build up that position group. Lincoln Riley said, deep down we knew no matter what happened last year, whether they won 5 games or 11 games or 15 games, they knew they were going to have to go out and recruit better to upgrade that front 7, and we saw some of that with the guys you mentioned, you know, Jamil Muhammad, Anthony Lucas, Keon Bars, even Solomon Tuliaupupu, who, you know, wasn't a guy who was recruited last year, but moved to the defensive line, and he was a guy who got a lot of praise from Lincoln Riley. He was just a guy who, you know, was just a bull rusher last year, but now he's really refined his technique as a defensive lineman, and you're seeing him to start to impose his will as a defensive lineman, as a former linebacker. He was credited, I believe, with 2 tackles for a loss, 1 being a sack. I believe maybe one of them was with Jack Sullivan. Like Jack Sullivan, another body that's on that front. So there were a lot of plays to be made. You know, Jamil Muhammad had that poke out for the fumble recovery that it felt like 30 years for someone to pick it up, but Max Williams ended up grabbing on it. So yeah, the front was disruptive. You know, they got some pressure on the quarterbacks. Again, you know, Miller Moss, Malachi Nelson, a couple times they had to scramble out of that pocket to stay alive, but overall, yeah, that front was getting after the quarterbacks. Maybe that's more of a question for the offensive line, but you like to see some pressure. And again, it's just a spring game, but to be able to do that in the Coliseum in a scrimmage period is a good sign.
Yeah, Lincoln mentioned about Solo. He's one of the guys that's been the most disruptive off the edge all spring for USC, and that's a guy USC wants to get going. He's dealt with injuries in the past, came back last year, and is coming back again this year, trying to wreak havoc on that defensive line now. And you mentioned Keon Barrs had some great plays. Jamil Muhammad looked good. Anthony Lucas looked like a force to be reckoned with. So really, I think, great signs for the USC front seven. That's the position group that really the defense hangs in limbo if that side can improve on the defense. So if they can step up with the great DB room that we've talked about and an improving linebacker room where you feel pretty solid about guys like Mason Cobb, who we got to talk to today, Shane Lee, Eric Gentry, Rajon Davis, Tackett Curtis, who I know you'll want to talk about later, that the defense could start to be shaping up. And Lincoln Riley mentioned bigger bodies. They're feeling good about that. Overall, what were your final thoughts from the defense today?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a spring game, but I think you can be a little cautiously optimistic. I mean, there's, Lincoln Riley's going to say a lot of good things about his defense moving to this. Alex Grinch, still the number one guy on a lot of fans, hit list just because they're angry at him for the Tulane game and all that. But you have to give them a little bit of credit because they are doing things to upgrade that defense. They went out, they got players. And again, transfer portal opens today, so they're going to be shopping for some more players to bring in for the defense. So everybody is working together to try to improve that defense. I think you saw some encouragement from the things you saw here. They have better players. They have more athletic players. They got more depth. They have more competition. Those are all things you want in a recipe to build a better defense. But again, we're not really going to know until we get into the season, until those games start going. When they go, they're playing Utah, they're playing Notre Dame. Those are the games that are going to tell us where this defense actually is. It's not going to be really San Jose State. They can get, the first game last year, they got 3 pick sixes. Those games are good for the confidence building, but we won't know really until we get to the heart of the schedule. But I think you can come away from the spring game being cautiously optimistic that the defense is at least moving in the right direction, but they still have a ways to go.
Yeah, well, we knew the offense was going to be good. We saw some of the players. We knew that we were going to be good, make some big plays early. You had Caleb Williams have that 3-play touchdown drive. Brendan Rice had a big catch. Marshawn Lloyd had some good runs, maybe even just one. It felt like a lot of the big players for USC didn't play a whole ton, but some of the newcomers, freshmen, as well as Dorian Singer, the transfer, some of the freshman running backs, they got some more time. So let's start. I guess we can go to the quarterbacks before we round it out with the freshmen. But with Caleb Williams coming out of the game after 3 plays, we saw a lot of Miller Moss, a lot of Malachi Nelson, a little bit of Jake Jensen as well. What did you see and understand from what the coaches and players said after the game about the quarterbacks that came into play after Caleb Williams?
With Caleb, obviously he was, Lincoln Riley was asked, was that by design? Why only one series for Caleb? He said, well, Caleb Williams played a lot of football. Yes, that is an understatement. He's played a lot of football, won a Heisman Trophy. You don't need him out there. You don't risk anything. He has nothing really to show or prove in a spring game. So this was all about getting those young guys, Miller Moss, Malachi Nelson, and Jake Jensen, some time, some reps, some opportunity to build their confidence in the offense. And, I thought we saw some good plays. Thought we saw some bad plays. Miller Moss did get picked off in the end zone, which we thought was a touchdown, which wasn't. It was overruled initially. It was ruled as a touchdown. Then they came back and said, no, it was interception. But they kept the touchdown points on. I don't know. It was very confusing. But Miller Moss made some nice plays, made some nice throws. He was under duress a little bit. They were switching with the offensive line, still trying to build that chemistry. But I thought he moved well for the most part. And Malachi Nelson, it was good to see him get the final 2 drives. Jake Jensen was able to lead a touchdown drive to keep the offense alive. Malachi Nelson then followed that up with a touchdown drive to get them within 5 points. And then he was able to lead them all the way down the field to get into position to win the game. So you like to see that, the 5-star quarterback being in a situation, not a super do or die situation in a spring game, but just to be out there and see those competitive reps in a competitive situation and try to make a play. Obviously, it didn't work out with the interception, but hey, you like to see them put themselves in a position to win a game. And I thought both quarterbacks did really well. Jake Jensen came in, like I said, led a touchdown drive. A lot of good things from the quarterback room outside of Caleb Williams, who was a superstar in his 3 plays, but a lot of improvement that we saw. And it was great to see Malachi Nelson out here in general because we didn't know how much he was going to be able to do coming off that shoulder injury. So it was very critical that he was able to get some reps and look good out there.
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot about Caleb Williams as we get into the fall practices eventually. So it was good to see a big stage for Miller Moss and Malachi Nelson, even Jake Jensen and Lincoln Riley mentioned. Reps are far more valuable for them, and I think you saw them grow throughout their performance today, and I'm sure they'll learn from this performance when they get into the film room as well. I know you want to talk about freshmen, and a lot of the offensive side of the ball revolves around freshmen. You got the two freshman backs in Quentin Joyner, Marion Peterson. You've got the freshman wide receiver Zachariah Branch, who looked like an absolute dog out there today. And then on the defensive side, we've already mentioned Christian Pierce. We saw Tackett Curtis for a bit as well. Sam Greene, where do you want to start on the offensive or defensive side?
It really doesn't matter to me. I think just more overall theme for the game was that the freshmen definitely left an imprint on this game. You know, Christian Pierce coming up with that big play, and then the entire secondary celebrating with him like, you know, they were going crazy like it was just like an actual game. You love to see that. Sam Greene coming in there, he was one of my players I was excited to see. He was very active, getting a lot of pressure, and came up with a sack out there as a rush end, so great to see that. Elijah Page, the big left tackle, 6'7", 300-pounder, was early enrollee. It was the key to get him an early enrollee. With the impending departure of Cortland Ford, Elijah Page had to step up, and he was your second-team left tackle for all of the spring game. He got plenty of valuable reps going out there against Sam Greene, Keon Bars, Anthony Lucas. You know, those are valuable reps for him as he builds his confidence as hopefully someone they can use for this season for that offensive tackle depth. And then, as you mentioned, the two running backs, the Texas two-step between Quentin Joyner and Amarian Peterson. Quentin Joyner was playing like a guy out there. Now, again, it wasn't against, you know, the first-team unit. Sometimes it was the second team or third team. But Quentin Joyner had some really nice runs, was able to keep his balance. Even though he was hit, he had really nice footwork, patience, and deceptive speed. That's something that he was more the lightning guy out of these two, but I don't think a lot of people realize he does have speed. Austin Jones said, watch out, he does have deceptive speed. So he was able to showcase, got a touchdown, got into the end zone, and then Amarian Peterson, who's considered like the big back, showed off his athleticism by hurdling a defender and then in the end zone on his way to a touchdown as well. So both those guys played really, really well. And we've heard all spring camp, those guys are some guys, they're going to be great running backs, and they showcased it here in the spring game. Zachariah Branch, I know everyone was really excited. It seemed like there was a little bit of trouble finding that connection. It seemed like early he wasn't, he had a drop early on, and then some of the passes his way were just a little bit off target. So, you know, he started off slow is what I'm saying. And then by the end, you know, he had a really big catch and then try to fight off like three defenders to get the first down. And then he had a really big catch down the defensive sideline. Jalen Smith was in coverage. He did all he can to hold on to him and not let him go, because if he let him go, he was going for 6. So he had a big play down the sideline. So Zachariah Branch, I thought maybe a little bit bigger of a spring game was headed, but again, the disconnect was a little bit early and led to some frustrations, but he was able to still have an impact despite only a limited amount of touches.
And we knew he had speed. We knew he had juking ability. He tried to hurdle a guy, spin around a guy. What I didn't know he had was the ability to stiff arm Shane Lee to the ground. I mean, a lot of strength over the middle of the field with the ball in his hands, and it seems like a guy that, like Raleek Brown last year, USC is going to try and do everything that they can to get the ball in Zach Branch's hand, because he will be a difference maker when he does have the ball. Speaking of Raleek Brown, there are a couple other players I want to shout out. I thought he had a really good day. It's the first time we've really seen him in a game setting working solely as a slot receiver. Thought he was a good route runner. He did a really good job with the ball in his hands. He made Tackett Curtis miss. He made a big catch leaping right in front of Damani Jackson, his former Mater Dei teammate, where, you know, those two were going at it on the ground trying to say, I had an interception, no, I caught the ball, is trying to see who ended up coming up with it. But I thought Raleek Brown had a pretty good day. And you just mentioned some of those guys on the defensive line, like Keon Bars, a transfer that maybe doesn't get talked about enough. He had a great day. Were there any other players that you wanted to highlight before we wrap it up?
Well, like, that was a really good point about you and Raleek Brown. He was just, you know, he's been learning slot all of spring and just add another dimension to this already deadly offense, just moving a guy with that kind of ability and athleticism and quickness into the slot with Zachariah Branch maybe on the other side and Dorian Singer, and then you have your two running backs. It's just a whole lot for a defense to have to handle. I thought Sierra Wright had a nice game. You know, he was the guy who has gotten a lot of praise throughout spring camp. I thought he made a couple of big plays, a couple of big defensive stops in the air, you know, battling with some of those veteran wide receivers out there. But overall, you know, I think a lot of the players stepped up today. You know, there's probably some guys I'm missing, but I thought guys were active, guys were all over the ball. But again, Sierra Wright was probably one of my guys who was down the field making plays, and that's a good sign because USC does need a number one cornerback to fill that role for Mekhi Blackman.
Well, with the spring games coming to a close, that means it's the end of USC spring ball, which means we won't see USC until the fall back out on the football field. So, Chris, any more thoughts that you want to give before we wrap up USCFootball.com's coverage of spring football?
I do. I just remember the person that I forgot to mention. That's Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd It felt like he only had one carry, but his one carry was a dynamic carry. He bolted up the sideline, showcased a spin move, got out of some tackles, and broke up. I think it was like a 34-yard run or something like that. He showed that wiggle, and, he's a big guy. If you see him, you're like, I don't want that guy. I don't want to go head-to-head with that guy in the hole. That's how big he is. But, he's talked about, he has some elusiveness. He has some deceptive speed. He's like, don't count me out about being fast. That's what he said in his first media scrum, but we all saw those moves. We saw that elusiveness. We saw the ability to break tackles and get out of tackles, and a little bit of that wiggle. And again, he was an alumni of my high school, DeMatha Catholic, so got to show him some love. Only one carry, I think, but a very good carry. Might have been easily one of the top 5 plays from today's spring game. So got to show a little love to Marshawn Lloyd.
Well, you have to go check out the highlights to try and find that one. We'll have those coming out. We'll have plenty of articles as we continue to wrap up. Think we're going to be live on Tunnel Vision tomorrow night, just talking about the spring game, the end of spring ball in general. But there's a lot of news that's going to come out, so make sure you're staying tuned to all the things that we put out over the next couple of days. Chris, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
We're going to the second kind of off season, if you will, after the season. It is an interesting day just because it is the spring game, but also the transfer portal spring window officially open today. So the new faces that will be on USC's roster in a couple months are going to be here in this spot. They're at the school right now. They're going to go in the portal. USC still has some building to do, and they will finalize their roster, put the finishing touches on their roster as they try to make a push for a Pac-12 championship and possibly a college football playoff bid through this transfer portal. They have a couple spots open. There'll probably be a couple more with guys, a couple guys leaving out of the program. Already had a couple, eyeing the portal. Joshua Jackson, cornerback, entered the portal as a grad transfer 24 hours ago. So USC's finding some spots open on their roster, and they're going to try to fill that through the transfer portal. So lots to do for the staff. They don't get a break after the spring. They have to go to recruiting. It's a 15-day window for the spring window. So USC back on the grind, trying to finalize that roster for 2023, summer and the fall.
I don't know if you guys remember last year, but a player who didn't participate in the spring game that ended up being a decent-sized part of USC's season, Jordan Addison, the former Blitnikoff Award winner, potential first-round draft pick. He joined in this second window come last year.
And
Eric Gentry, who we didn't get to see today, but we've heard a lot of things. So make sure you're checking out all the content that's already out on the page. Make sure you're checking out Chris's transfer tracker that's going to be live on the website. But anyways, for Chris Trevino, I've been Jack Smith. Check out uscfootball.com for more.